So welcome to all of you. This is a great tribute to our presenter today, Maddie Anderson, that there's already so many participants. This program that I'm welcoming you to is sponsored by the J. Phillips Center for Interfaith Learning. It's endowed here at St. John's University. It serves both the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. And today's presenter, as I mentioned, is Maddie Anderson. She's a CSB, a College of St. Benedict Senior, that is. And she's a member of the J. Phillips Center's Student Interfaith Research and Leadership Program. At the conclusion of last semester, when I had the privilege and the pleasure of having Maddie in a class of mine, in an honors class, because she was such an outstanding student, I extended an invitation to Maddie to be a part of this Student Interfaith Research and Learning Leadership Program. And I'm delighted that she accepted. She accepted, telling me that she's going to be in Spain the following semester, that is this semester. And so it's from there that Maddie has been pursuing her research on the topic of religious diversity in Spain that you'll be hearing about presently. So because she's in Spain and because she's pursuing things Spanish having to do with the the Iberian Peninsula, Maddie and I both turned to Professor Christina Hennessy, who is a professor in Hispanic Studies here at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University. She's been Maddie's advisor for all 4 years of Maddie's time here. And she is the mentor then, we turned to her to be the mentor for this program. And as delighted as I am to have Maddie doing this research and now presenting this research, I'm also delighted to have Christina Hennessy as a part of this project. It's great to have both of you working with the J. Phillips Center for Interfaith Learning. Professor Hennessy, before coming to the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, lived and did graduate studies in Spain. She is the ideal person to be advising and mentoring Maddie in this project. So I'm going to turn it over to Professor Hennessy to introduce this outstanding student. Please, Professor Hennessy.
Thank you so much, John, for your kind words, and good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to be here, and I want to thank you all for making the time to attend today's presentation. I know it's a busy time. It's the last week of classes. So thank you very, very much for being here. And I see a lot of familiar faces, and I can guarantee you that you will enjoy the presentation. As John said, joining us today is Maddie Anderson, who, as John also said, I have had the pleasure of knowing her for 4 years, since her first year here at CSBSJU, as my student, as my advisee. And Maddie is a talented student in the honors program, a Phi Beta Kappa Society member, a Hispanic Studies major and pre-med student, a certified nurse assistant. And these are only a few of her many involvements and achievements, as her inquisitive mind and passion for learning have taken, and I have no doubt will continue to take her far. So she's joining us today from one of the most beautiful cities in Spain. And I have visited a lot of cities in Spain, right? So Seville, and will be sharing with us her observation and experiences on the topic of interfaith. Her research focuses on how Spain's interreligious history shaped the values, experiences, and dialogue between Muslim, Christians, and Jews, and what the current state of interfaith is in the contemporary scene of Spain today. So please welcome Maddie Anderson.
Hello, thank you very much, Dr. Hennessy, for that wonderful introduction. And I wanted to begin by saying thank you to Dr. Merkel and Dr. Hennessy again for giving me the opportunity to share with you all today. I'm going to share my screen. Perfect. All right. I was eager to accept Dr. Merkel's invitation to work for the J. Phillips Center while studying abroad because as a Hispanic studies major, I've learned a lot about the history and culture of Spain, and I know much of that has been greatly influenced by religion. As a pre-medicine student, I was also excited to get the chance to explore, learn from, and connect with Spanish culture to improve my cultural agility and develop what I would describe as a realistic consciousness of the values, perspectives, and history of interfaith relationships in Spain. So what is interfaith, if you of you may be wondering? So interfaith refers to interactions between different religions, and interfaith dialogue refers to the open and positive communication between these people of different religions in an effort to listen, learn from, and understand each other. Now, the purpose of interfaith dialogue is not to debate whose beliefs are correct or the most accurate, but rather to form connections with people who have different religious perspectives, which I believe can be found through our shared humanity. Now, la convivencia means the coexistence in English, and it describes a time in medieval Spain when Islam, Christianity, and Judaism are said to have coexisted. The Iberian Peninsula was under Muslim rule during that time period, but many Christians and Jews lived under their dominion. Now, I was interested in investigating this further because it is a somewhat controversial topic. As Chris Lowney says in his book, A Vanished World, medieval Spain was neither utopia nor dystopia, but a bit of both, often at the very same moment in the actions of any one conflicted person. Through readings, articles, and personal experiences, I wanted to further examine the reality of interfaith in medieval Spain to understand how these religions interacted, how they coexisted, and how religiously tolerant medieval Spain truly was. I agreed to participate in this program because I believe that it is not by having different perspectives that people of different faiths are divided. It is by assuming that one perspective is superior to others, discrediting other approaches to and relationships with God. I would also like to acknowledge that this sense of division also doesn't come from the religions themselves, but rather the way certain groups exploit and abuse the religions for personal gain, such as political power. The importance of interfaith dialogue and relationships is their potential to provide unity and respect for the intrinsic dignity of all humanity. Now, I've also always been passionate about understanding others, especially those with different experiences and perspectives than my own. And I knew this project would be a great opportunity to explore a dimension of the human experience that I had never examined in depth before. So as I said before, I conducted my research by reading books and articles, as well as examining my own personal experiences. So I read 2 books that discuss La Convivencia in detail, and these books were A Vanished World, Muslims, Christians, and Jews in Medieval Spain by Chris Lowney, and The Ornament of the World, How Muslims, Jews, and Christians Created a Culture of Tolerance in Medieval Spain by Maria Rosa Menecol. And you can see both of their covers on the screen now. I've also been living in Seville or Sevilla, Spain, for the past 3.5 months and have visited many cities in Spain that greatly exemplify the results of Spain's diverse religious history. And I will show you a few pictures of those cities now. So here are a few photos of my current home, Sevilla. While living here, I've toured many of the historical landmarks of the city, such as La Giralda and the Alcázar, both of which have great historical and religious significance to the country of Spain. La Giralda, which is the picture in the middle, was originally the minaret of the Great Mosque of Sevilla, but after La Reconquista, or the Christian Reconquest, it was converted into a bell tower for the cathedral. Next, we have Cordoba. I also visited this city on an excursion with my program, and Cordoba was the capital of Muslim Spain, or the Iberian Peninsula, as the country of Spain didn't exist yet in the Middle Ages. The main architectural structure I would like to highlight is La Mezquita Catedral, or Mosque Cathedral of Cordoba, which is where all of these pictures are from. Originally, it was a church that had been built on top of a Jewish temple and then was converted into a mosque by the Islamic Empire and then converted back into a church after La Reconquista. Next, we have Granada, which is another city that we were able to take an excursion to. Granada was the last city under Muslim dominion to fall to the Christian Reconquest in 1491. A significant historical landmark of Granada is the Alhambra, which was also my favorite tour of all of my time in Spain. The Alhambra was originally designed as a military fortress for the Islamic Empire, but was converted into a Christian palace during, you guessed it, La Reconquista. And next we have Toledo, which is another city that we were able to visit. And Toledo has been under Jewish, Muslim, and Christian rule during its history. And much of this is evident in its architecture and remaining religious sites. An important building from the Middle Ages is La Mezquita de Cristo de la Luz, which was a mosque built in 999 that was converted into a church after Toledo was conquered by the Christian king Alfonso VI at the beginning of the 12th century. Now we'll talk a little bit about the history. In order to fully understand the current situation of interfaith relationships in Spain, it's important to know the history. As Chris Lowney, the author of A Vanished World, so beautifully stated, reflecting on our past illuminates our present. Understanding this history allows us to get to the why of these present-day interfaith relationships rather than simply the what. While statistics can provide us with concrete numbers depicting how the presence of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism have changed since medieval times, and trust me, we will get to the statistics at the end, a well-rounded perspective can only be developed with a reasonable foundation. Before the Muslims came to the Iberian Peninsula, or Al-Andalus as it was called at that time, the country was ruled by the Visigoths. And I've included an image in case you don't know what the Iberian Peninsula and Al-Andalus were. So in 589, the Visigoths joined the Roman Church, and they began enforcing oppressive regulations on people belonging to other faiths and living under their reign, especially the Jewish population. They made it illegal for Christians and Jews to be married, wouldn't allow Jews to own Christian slaves, but the reverse was allowed if not encouraged, and forced the Jewish community to choose between converting to Christianity, going into exile, or becoming slaves, as I stated before. They also outlawed Jewish practices and the observance of Jewish holy days. Then in the year 711, a Muslim man named Tariq ibn Ziyad led diverse troops of Muslims from different Islamic factions of Africa across the Strait of Gibraltar and into Al-Andalus. Due to the Visigoth persecution of the Jews, the Muslims were welcomed with open arms by the Jewish community, as they knew that any other group in power would likely provide better living conditions. Then in 756, following a massacre in the first Islamic kingdom in Damascus, one member of the ruling Umayyad family named Abd al-Rahman crossed the Strait of Gibraltar with forces of Syrians and Berbers, other factions of Islam from northern Africa, to defeat the emir of Al-Andalus, making al-Rahman the new emir of most of Islamic Spain. This was the initiation of the reign of the Umayyad family, which lasted for many years and was considered the most unifying and tolerant empire of medieval Spain. And this marked the beginning of the time period often referred to as La Convivencia, or the coexistence. Abd al-Rahman's forces came to Al-Andalus with relatively peaceful and tolerant interactions with the Christians and Jews living in that region. They didn't immediately try to force them to convert to Islam, they didn't try to force them out of the region, and they didn't act violently discriminatory toward members of other faiths. Christians and Jews were given the freedom to continue living under Islamic reign without forced conversion because they were believed to worship the same one God of Abraham as the Muslims. From the Islamic perspective, their differences existed simply because they followed what the Muslims considered to be mistaken dogmas. Now, the Quran, the holy book of Islam, refers to Christians and Jews as dini, or people of the book. With this title, non-Muslims belonging to the other two monotheistic faiths were permitted the freedom to worship, practice their faith, and hold their own limited self-government, although conversions were still encouraged. However, this title didn't come with complete freedom and equality, as they were still restricted by certain rules. They were also forced to pay supplemental taxes to maintain these rights. By the year 800, about 10% of the people of Al-Andalus converted to Islam, and the amount doubled in the following 2 generations. I think this is likely due to the pressures from the Islamic Empire, additional taxes, and the desire to belong to their surrounding community of Muslim neighbors. As the rate of conversions to Islam increased, so too did the number of marriages between people of different ethnicities and cultures, further adding to the flourishing, diverse population of Al-Andalus. Beyond those who converted to the Islamic faith, there were many Christians who adopted the Arabic culture while maintaining their Christian faith. They spoke Arabic, dressed in Arabic clothing, and followed many of the traditions of the Arabic culture. The term for these Arabized Christians and Jews, or Christians and Jews living under Muslim dominion, is Mozarabs. Mozarabs committed to these changes because they allowed them to better assimilate into the growing Arabic culture in the cities they were living in. And some even felt that these changes helped them to grow in their relationships with God. As the Arabic language tends to be very poetic, especially in religious writings, some Christians actually preferred to read scripture in Arabic as they felt more emotionally connected to, through the words in that language. In the capital city of Cordoba, pictured here, there were enormous libraries filled with books from all over the world on language, religion, poetry, and philosophy. These infamous libraries were open to Muslims, Christians, and Jews, where they were able to grow both intellectually and spiritually through their understanding of the works. Maria Rosa Menachal, the author of Ornament of the World, one of my research books, also argues that these libraries demonstrated a physical representation of the interfaith relationships of medieval Al-Andalus, as books in Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin sat next to one another on the shelves, describing the unique perspectives of life and purpose and the world people were living in. The growing multilingualism in Al-Andalus also contributed to this mixing of cultures, as Christians and Jews were fluent in Arabic, and they were able to learn from the many philosophical and religious writings housed in Cordoba's libraries, expanding their worldview and exposing them to the great minds of philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle. Toledo was another important city during this time, as it was home to La Escuela de Traductores, or School of Translators. Many of these classical works in Hebrew, Arabic, and Latin that were housed in Cordoba's libraries came from this school of translators in the 12th and 13th centuries. The multilingual and multicultural society of Toledo allowed for an elevated level of scholarship as intellectuals of diverse backgrounds worked together to make works of philosophy and science increasingly accessible to the literate population of the Iberian Peninsula. An influential individual of this time was Moses Maimonides. Maimonides was a Jewish man and son of a rabbi living in Cordoba who studied mathematics and medicine in Arabic. He was eventually appointed the personal physician and advisor to many powerful people within the Islamic Empire's government, and he provided the community of Al-Andalus with a unique perspective, as he was a Spanish Jew living under Muslim rule, producing works in Arabic in the subjects of medicine, theology, and philosophy. Through his extensive studies of a wide range of interdisciplinary subjects, Maimonides worked to connect faith and reason, something many people had previously thought was impossible. The infamous libraries of Cordoba, the School of Translators, and intellectuals like Maimonides himself demonstrate interfaith on the scholarly level, which to me shows that interfaith is an intellectual concept, and interfaith dialogue fosters this creativity and enlightenment. And the more interconnected the three faiths became within the culture of Al-Andalus, the more it seemed as though the three religions could continue to coexist peacefully under Islamic rule. However, not all Christians were fully accepting of the Arabic culture. As Christians began to speak up against the Islamic faith, it was recognized that this form of blasphemy was illegal in Cordoba at the time, and they were actually decapitated. And this began a period of martyrdoms for the Christians living under Muslim rule. Now, this brings about the question of how to define religious tolerance, because although Christians and Jews were able to live within the Islamic dominion and maintain their faith, they had to follow different rules, pay extra taxes, respect Islam without the mutuality of respect for Muslims toward Christianity and Judaism, and were overall considered second-class citizens. This demonstrates how when religious differences are used to divide people, our sense of shared humanity is lost. This concept is exemplified in the civil wars between different Muslim factions of the recently fragmented Muslim kingdom, as well as the Catholic Church's crusades in La Reconquista, or the Reconquest. Islamic rule was passed between many different Muslim groups, including the Almoravids and the Almohads from Northern Africa, who were significantly more discriminatory toward Jews and Christians than the previous Islamic empires, as they closed synagogues, forced members of the Jewish faith to wear distinctive clothing so that when they were out in public in society, people could recognize they belonged to the Jewish faith, and pressured all Christians and Jews to convert to Islam through the threat of slavery, exile, or even death. Fueled by the vindictive sentiments of the previously oppressed Christian community, La Reconquista accelerated as Christians began to revolt with a renewed intensity against the Islamic Empire, expelling the majority of the Muslim population. Cordoba was conquered in 1236, Valencia, a city in northern Spain, in 1238, Seville in 1248, and finally Granada in 1491. And this painting that you can see on the screen right now is La Rendición de Granada, or the surrender of Granada. And it's a very famous painting that's actually housed in El Prado Museum in Madrid. Now, in 1492, La Reconquista continued as the Catholic conquerors continued their efforts to create a religiously homogeneous society by targeting the Jewish community. Due to the Alhambra decree, Jews were given the options of expulsion or conversion, and even some of those who converted, called conversos, were expelled due to the fear that they may revert back to Judaism. Then in 1609, the descendants of the Muslim Empire who had converted to Christianity after La Reconquista, called Moriscos, were also expelled due to similar fears as the conversos, that they would return to their Islamic faith, along with the overall prejudice against anyone connected to the Muslim community. Now, this strong emphasis on Christian superiority has been involved in recent Spanish history as well. During the dictatorship of Francisco Franco from 1936 to his death in 1975, Franco functioned in alliance with the Catholic Church in hopes of expanding their religious empire by increasing the number of followers in Spain. As a Catholic himself, Franco worked in partnership with the church through a censorship which prevented any and all criticisms of the church. And this censorship aligned with the values of the church, further demonstrating his ideal of an absolute conversion of all non-Christian citizens of Spain. My experience abroad while conducting this research has provided me with some very valuable lessons. Interfaith dialogue encourages us to analyze our own understanding of our beliefs, giving us the opportunity to recognize why we hold those beliefs rather than simply knowing what they are. This project has allowed me to reflect more deeply on my own faith. So I've always believed that the different religions are simply cultural and historical interpretations of God's revelation. And now I understand that this pluralistic mindset stems from a similar perspective to the concept of people of the book in Islam, that although doctrinal differences between different faiths exist, they are connected through both their shared faith in God and their humanity of the followers. I've also learned that the abuse of religion for personal and political gain results in generational trauma, centuries of mistrust, and the need for intentional efforts to heal the affected communities. In contrast to the United States, the Spanish Constitution has actually only included a section addressing the separation of church and state since 1978, following the end of Francisco Franco's dictatorship. So according to statistics from 2021, the statistics I referred to at the beginning, 58.2% of Spain identifies as Roman Catholic, 16.2% as atheist, 10.8% as agnostic, 2.7% belonging to a religion other than Christianity, and 10.5% non-believers, with the remaining 1.7% identifying as non-specific. Although the majority of Spain identifies as Catholic, the combined percentage of atheists, agnostics, and non-believers adds up to about 38%, showing that over a quarter of Spain's population has turned away from religion. Before coming to Spain, I would have been surprised by these numbers because the country has been dominantly Christian for many, many centuries. But now I've experienced a culture that's far less religious than I had previously expected. I've been told by Spaniards that there's a sense of Catholic or nothing, meaning people either identify as devout members of the Catholic Church, non-practicing Catholics, or non-believers. I think this turning away from faith really stems from the residual anger from the injustices of Spain's religious history, along with people's search for answers that fit their 21st century world. I'm very grateful that we have opportunities like this one to have these kinds of conversations because they allow for a more dynamic and progressive approach to faith by facilitating conversations about meaning and purpose and understanding, and encourage all of us to find the unity in our diversity. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Maddie, for the wonderful presentation. Yes, we can clap on Zoom because we have the possibility if you want to. Now we will open the floor to questions. Please use the Zoom feature, raise hand, and I will ask you to step in and ask your questions, or if you prefer, you can write your question in the chat and I will read it on your behalf. So I'm going to have to monitor both. Professor Bolanos has a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maddie. This was wonderful, a very important topic. And more than anything, I really enjoyed how you highlighted the tolerant attitude of the Umayyad dynasty in particular, and also the different factions between the Umayyad and also the later, the Almohavides and Almohades. So I just wanted to, I was interested in particularly how Ladino is still a remaining, it's called, it has its own language, but really as evidence of the Sephardic Jews that lived in the peninsula, and it still thrives. I mean, in Jerusalem now, it's still spoken, and there are schools now of Ladino. And there was also in New York, there was even a newspaper written in Ladino. Did you get a chance to read it, take a look at Ladino?
No, I haven't had a chance to look that over, but that's very interesting. So I'll have to look into that. Thank you very much.
Once you see it, you will be amazed at how much it resembles Spanish, modern Spanish.
Oh.
Even in the pronunciation, there's also videos and everything. So, and there was also in Greece when some of them were when they left the peninsula, back in the 15th century, that they actually stopped over in Greece before they went someplace else. But yeah, it was very, very interesting. Also, but my question now is regarding the covert religious practices of both Jews and Muslims during in the Reconquest, after the Reconquest and the fall of Granada. Did you find any information about that?
About the
covert religious practices, how both Muslims and Jews, in fact, did secretly maintain some of their practices. By some of them say menorahs or things like that. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I have actually read a little bit about that. And thank you for bringing that up, because people would still practice those religions, but they'd have to do it in secret, as if they were found out, they would be expelled from the country or potentially killed for continuing those practices during that time. And I think also some of that could potentially be reflected in the way that the statistics are reported today, just because the people may or may not, when it comes to statistics, those aren't necessarily going to be exact, because people have the choice to respond to surveys or to not respond to surveys, or to say that they belong to one faith or to say that they don't. So I wonder, I'll have to look into it a little bit more, but I wonder if some of that is reflected too in the lower percentage of people of other faiths in Spain today.
Yeah. And what do you think currently of the granting of, recently the granting of citizenship by Sephardic Jews that can actually prove that they were expelled unlawfully?
I think that I applaud the country for making an attempt to make reparations with the people who have been wronged through their religious histories, those injustices that I had sort of mentioned towards the end. And so I applaud the country for trying to make reparations.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Wonderful job.
Thank you.
We have a question on the chat from Emily M. Maddie, it seems that you have what you have accomplished as your research. It's just that one semester. Do you plan on doing anything more with this research?
Yes. So I'm very grateful that I have the opportunity to continue this research into the summer, and I'm hoping to publish a paper through the J. Phillips Center sometime at the beginning of the fall.
And Professor Livingston has a recommendation of the book based on what Professor Bolanos has. So we will keep the the note there for you to check that book. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much.
We have another question. What are some ways you believe the interfaith situation can be improved in Spain?
That is an excellent question. So I think there are a few ways, and I think what Professor Bolanos had brought up before is one of the ways, by trying to make reparations with the wronged communities. I also think that one thing that Spain can do is try and sort of rebuild that sense of trust in the different religious institutions within the country, because I think that that's part of the reason why people are moving away from faith and maybe not necessarily wanting to enter into those interfaith conversations, just because of the mistrust that has been caused by the corruption of these different institutions in the past. I also think that by creating more inclusive spaces of worship would be another manner in which to foster more interfaith dialogue and to improve the interfaith situation in Spain, because specifically La Mezquita Catedral in Cordoba currently is only used for Christian worship or Catholic Mass, and there are not services for the Islamic faith held there anymore. So I think, and there are petitions that are going on at the moment to hopefully bring that, open it up to other forms of worship in La Mezquita Catedral. And I think if they continue to do that in some of these spaces of worship around Spain that have their diverse religious histories, I think that that is another way that the situation could be improved. Thank you for that question.
We have one more suggestion for a poetry book from Professor Ketchum, and I will again save the note and pass it on to you, Maddie. Thank you, Professor Ketchum. Did you observe, another question here, did you observe in your time in Spain Islamophobia given the rising popularity of Vox ideals?
That is another great question, and kind of a difficult one to answer as well. I think I have sensed, I don't know necessarily if it's Islamophobia as much as people don't necessarily talk about their faith as openly and as often as I would have expected since I've been here. And for that reason, I feel like I don't have a great sense necessarily of whether or not there is a rise in Islamophobia. But that is another thing that I can look into as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
And perhaps some of that you want to, a lot of the sub-Saharan immigrants that are going to the shores, the Spanish shores, tend to be Muslim. So, and then with Vox's values, which is anti-immigrant, and anti-woman, anti-many, many things, it's kind of compounded. It's the racial issue between, sub-Saharan African versus, for example, from the Maghreb region. Yeah. Maghreb, yeah. You might want to, yeah, that might be an interesting distinction as well.
Absolutely, thank you.
Maddie, you mentioned, and you and I talk about this one, that people are turning away from religion in general, and especially young people, right? So do you think there is something else they are turning to find purpose in life?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think one thing that I've noticed over here is that a lot of people have actually been turning to philosophy, especially young people, rather than religion. So a lot of conversations that I've had with people, I've been surprised because a lot of young people over here are able to tell you their favorite philosopher, which is not something I feel like is very common in the United States to have a favorite philosopher, though I'm sure some people do. And I think it's really interesting, and it kind of stems back to, I think, that sense of sort of looking for answers elsewhere that they may not be getting from following a religious tradition. I think it can also be difficult just because at times religion can be seen as sort of static. And I think that especially in this 21st century world, it's really difficult for young people when something that they're looking to for answers and for purpose and for meaning feels static to them, feels old-fashioned, and it doesn't feel like it's necessarily progressing with the way that the world may be progressing. And I think that's what draws me really to interfaith, is that interfaith dialogue and conversations and that open-mindedness really feels more progressive, more dynamic. But yeah, I think that one thing that I've noticed is that people have been turning to philosophy.
And there's a follow-up question here, if this is something that you have noticed across all ages and demographics, or just young people who are finding those answers in philosophy.
Thank you. That is also another great question. I think it does spread across all ages, but I think especially within the young population. And also personally, I've just had more of an opportunity to speak with younger people, as I myself am part of the younger population here, but also with other people that I've spoken to. Spain in general seems to have a pretty big interest in philosophy. So I think it probably does spread across all ages and demographics.
Great, thank you. Anybody else who has any question? Extra credit for a question? I'm going to give just a few more seconds to see. Okay, well, 1 second, please. We have a lot of bravos and congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
One more question. What was your favorite part about studying abroad? That's a nice question also.
That is a great question.
Yes.
And I have to pick just one. I think
up to 3.
Up to 3. Oh, okay. No, I think just the way that this program is set up and having the ability to actually live with a host family. And, I think by the end of this program, I've really felt like I'm kind of part of the community here. And I feel like that's really unique and special and something that I'll probably appreciate for the rest of my life. So.
And this is the first year we ran the program in Seville. So that's wonderful that, the program is running so smoothly. It's a beautiful city, right? Yes.
It's amazing.
And it offers a lot of opportunities. That's great.
So I'll just say my thanks right now. Maddie, I've had such high expectations of you since you started that course with me. And throughout that course, you surpassed them time and time again. And you surpassed my high expectations again. You've really done yourself proud, the program over there proud. I'm so grateful that you've been a part of the Student Interfaith Research and Leadership Program. I'm delighted, as you had already told me, and you've told others, that you plan to continue this research, that you will continue writing during the summer. I'll be so delighted to have this published via the J. Phillips Center and Digital Commons, and who knows, maybe we'll get it. You'll get it published elsewhere. So thank you so much, and Dr. Hennessy, you've been such a wonderful mentor. This research has come to such beautiful fruition. You focused on 2 really important books, but I know you've also read a lot of other articles. You've done a lot of, exploration there in Spain. I don't think you could be a better advertisement. There could be a better advertisement for study abroad in Spain. I'm just as delighted and grateful as possible to both you and to you too, Dr. Hennessy. Thank you so much. Are there other questions? I see a few more in chat there. Do you want to read them?
They're mostly to say
Oh.
great job, and yes, I don't see any other question, but please go ahead if I missed you. I think Michael was, it's an email. Michael was raising his hand, maybe
Is that
early.
Michael Livingston, Professor
No,
Livingston?
no, not Michael. Michael, or I think it was one student, a student. Driscoll, is it Mike Driscoll?
Yup, that was me.
Yes. Do you have a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did. I was gonna ask you, in your opinion, what revolution kind of caused the most disruption within your studies, or caused most disruption to religion and like the movement of, Christianity to Muslim and so forth?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I think oftentimes La Reconquista is talked about, especially in classes, because it was so influential, and a lot of those impacts are still seen in Spain today. But I do think that there were other very important disruptions, as you call them, to interfaith relationships in Spain prior to that. And one thing that I found that was really interesting in my research was that actually a lot of the conflict occurred between different subgroups within each religion. And so it was sort of that competition for power. And I know that I only briefly mentioned them, but like the Almoravids and the Almohads and different Muslim factions that were fighting to hold power of the Islamic Empire. I think a lot of those conflicts really contributed to those interfaith relationships and the overall disruption of faith in Spain. I think they're very similarly impactful. Yeah.
And perhaps more recently, one of the great disruptions to religion was by people like before, thinking themselves super religious, the Franco people, Franco, and I have the impression, but I'd like to hear your response to that. You've already broached it, but in the wake of Franco, do you find it understandable that so many people have abandoned religion, particularly Catholicism in this case?
Yes, absolutely. I think that kind of goes back to that sense of mistrust, and because of the corruption and the collaboration between Franco and the Catholic Church, and using religion to gain power rather than using religion for the way that it was intended, that exploiting and abuse of religion. And I absolutely think that that still affects Spain's current state of interfaith, especially since it was so recent, since the dictatorship just ended in 1975. So.
Any other questions? I'm sorry if I missed anybody. No. Okay. Well, it's 1:45, so we can conclude here. Thank you very much for being here today, for attending. If you have any other questions, you can always email Maddie directly. Yes, wonderful. And I want to say that Maddie has been doing this on the top of her final exams, being abroad, and she has done a fantastic job. I know she's going to go more in depth as she's preparing the paper for, publication. But yes, congratulations, Maddie. Thank you so much for your hard work.
Thank you for this opportunity.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Jen.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.